The galaxy burns. 10,000 years have passed since the Emperor's golden light was dimmed, since brother turned upon brother, and the dream of mankind was torn asunder. The echoes of that ancient betrayal still scar the stars. Worlds rebuild upon the bones of empires long dead, and still the drums of war thunder across eternity. Once there was Horus, the brightest of the Emperor's sons, the Warmaster who bore the hopes of humanity upon his shoulders. And once there was love between father and son, until that love was drowned beneath the lies of the warp. When Horus fell, he took half the Imperium with him. When the Emperor struck him down, he condemned humanity to 10 millennia of silence, seated upon a throne of golden ruin. But death was not the end. From the ashes of that broken age, another rose, a son of the same legion, forged in rage and bound by destiny. He was there when the Warmaster fell. He bore the shame of the sons of Horus. He carried the memory of betrayal, not as grief, but as a weapon. Across the stars, his name is whispered in fear and reverence. Abaddon, the Despoiler, the heir to Horus' wrath, the architect of the Long War, the eternal enemy of mankind. This is his story, a tale written in fire and darkness, of a warrior who refused to kneel before gods or mortals, of 13 crusades that scarred the galaxy, of a name that became legend, and a legend that became nightmare. For 10,000 years, he has waged war, unending, and in the shadows of eternity, the Warmaster rises again. The shadow of Horus. The siege of Terra had ended, but its echoes had not. The imperial palace lay shattered, its golden towers blackened by the fires of betrayal. The Emperor, father of mankind, master of the Imperium, was entombed upon his golden throne, neither dead nor alive. And Horus, once his most beloved son, was no more. The vengeful spirit, flagship of the Warmaster, drifted silently through the void, a tomb for a god's chosen. Its halls reeked of blood, oil, and madness. The banners of the lunar wolves hung in tatters, their sigils scorched away, their legacy consumed by shame. Among the survivors, one figure moved like a shadow carved from wrath. Ezekiel Abaddon, first captain of the Sons of Horus. The death of the son. He had watched his father die. He had seen the Emperor's light tear through Horus' soul, burning away every trace of the man he once was. And in that moment, Abaddon's heart had turned to iron. He did not weep. He did not kneel. He raged. "You were supposed to be our salvation," he whispered into the void, "and you damned us all." The legions fled into the warp, broken and hunted. The great betrayal had ended, but the long war had begun. The sons of Horus, disgraced and despised even among traitors, hid within the eye of terror. They fought each other in desperation, killing brothers over scraps of pride. Their once glorious armor, once the proud grey of Luna, now dulled to the color of ash. Abaddon watched as his legion rotted from within. He saw their faith crumble. Some turned to the worship of demons, others to madness. But within him, something else was kindling. Not devotion, not despair, but defiance. He swore that he would never bow to the Emperor, nor to the ruinous powers that had used Horus like a puppet. If gods demanded worship, he would give them war instead. If the Imperium sought vengeance, he would answer with annihilation. And so he cast away the name Warmaster. Horus was dead, and no one could replace him. But something darker, more enduring, had been born in his place. The galaxy will remember his fall, Abaddon vowed. but it will never forget my rise. Among the ruin of the heresy, the seeds of a new darkness took root. Silent, patient, inevitable, the Imperium believed itself victorious. Yet in the eye of terror, vengeance began to take shape. A warrior without a master, a legion without a purpose, a future without light. Thus began the shadow of Horus. And from that shadow, the Despoiler would one day emerge. The fall of the sons of Horus. When the Warmaster died, his sons died with him. Though their hearts still beat, their souls were ash. The vengeful spirit drifted through the warp, a monument to despair. Within its broken halls, the once proud sons of Horus tore each other apart. Brother turned upon brother, captains clawed at one another for scraps of command. The oaths that once bound them in brotherhood now reeked of betrayal and madness. Their Primarch, the symbol of their purpose, was gone, and in his absence, they became carrion for the gods. The Eye of Terror welcomed them like a predator with open jaws. Its tides of unreality swallowed their fleets. Warp storms howled across their ships, and demons whispered through the Vox channels, mocking the name of Horus. They told the sons of Horus that their father had been weak, that the gods had abandoned them, that they were forsaken. On the demon world of Malium, the Legion made their refuge. They built fortresses from the bones of their fallen. Their warbands raided one another for fuel, for slaves, for vengeance. Their green armor, once a mark of pride, grew tarnished, corroded, blackened with filth and shame. Some sought redemption in the eyes of chaos. They knelt before demons, begging for the power to become whole again. Others rejected the gods entirely, retreating into isolation and madness. The legion that had once led half of mankind into rebellion had become a fractured echo, a ghost of its former glory. And then came the greatest insult of all, the Emperor's children, those decadent monsters who had once fought beside Horus, descended upon Malium like locusts. They came not for conquest, but for sport. Led by the mad demagogue Fabius Biel, they desecrated the crypts of the Warmaster himself. They tore open his tomb, mocked his memory, and, with laughter echoing through the void, they stole the body of Horus, the corpse of the Warmaster, the vessel that once carried the will of the gods, was dragged away by the butchers of Slanesh to be cloned, defiled, and remade, and the sons of Horus did nothing. They watched, they trembled, they hid. Abaddon's fury was beyond words. He slaughtered those who dared speak Horus' name in vain. He hunted the Emperor's children across 100 worlds, spilling oceans of blood in silence. But the truth burned in him like poison. His legion had fallen too far. No vengeance, no oath, no god could redeem them. "We are no longer wolves," he said, voice heavy with iron. "We are carrion, feeding upon the corpse of our father." And yet, amid ruin, there was still one unbroken will. Abaddon saw the truth the others refused to face. The sons of Horus had died with their Primarch. What remained was rot, and rot could not be healed. It could only be burned away. He would burn it, all of it, and from the ashes he would forge something new. Let the galaxy forget the name of Horus, Abaddon vowed. From now on, there will be only me. Abaddon's refusal of the crown. The Warmaster was dead. Horus, the son once most beloved of the Emperor, now lay in ruin. His body shattered, his soul consumed by the powers he sought to master. The traitor legions, leaderless and broken, scattered into the warp, hunted and despised, by both the Imperium and their own former allies. In the ruins of the vengeful spirit, amidst the echoes of their defeat, the sons of Horus stood in shame and confusion, a legion without purpose, a name without honor. But among them, one man did not weep, one man did not kneel. Ezekiel Abaddon, first captain of the sons of Horus, the former right hand of the Warmaster, looked upon the corpse of his father and saw not tragedy, but betrayal. To him, Horus had been strong once, glorious even, but he had fallen to weakness, seduced by gods who cared nothing for his dream. When the surviving Chaos warlords gathered and offered Abaddon the Warmaster's crown, he spat upon it. He declared that Horus had failed, that he had been nothing more than a pawn of the ruinous powers. "There shall be no Warmaster of Chaos," Abaddon roared, "not while we remain slaves to those who whisper lies." This refusal shocked even the most hardened of traitors. To defy the Chaos gods so openly was to invite their wrath. Yet, Abaddon's defiance did not bring destruction. It brought fear. The dark gods watched in silence as their new champion rejected their throne. And they waited. For decades that followed, Abaddon vanished into the shadows of the Eye of Terror. While other warlords fought over scraps, he planned. He rebuilt. He remembered the discipline of the Legiones Astartes and twisted it into something darker. No longer the sons of Horus, his legion would be reborn, the Black Legion, stripped of weakness, purged of sentiment, united not by worship, but by purpose. Abaddon's refusal of the crown was not the end of Horus's legacy. It was the beginning of something far more terrible. A new era of vengeance, not for the glory of gods, but for the mastery of chaos itself. I am no one's son. I am no one's servant. I am the Despoiler. I am the end of the Imperium. Ezekiel Abaddon. The silent decades. For nearly a century after the Siege of Terror, the galaxy fell eerily quiet. The Imperium licked its wounds, rebuilding fortress worlds and sanctifying battlefields still soaked in the blood of demigods. The traitor legions, once instruments of galactic conquest, dissolved into madness within the roiling storm of the warp. They fought among themselves for dominion over the Eye of Terror, their warships prowling through nightmare currents, their champions rising and dying in endless succession. And in that silence, that hollow aftermath, Abaddon disappeared, while the others sought favor from demons or fought over Horus's cursed relics. Abaddon turned inward. He gathered only those who shared his contempt for the weakness of old. He burned the banners of the sons of Horus, stripped his armor of its fading green, and painted it black, the color of mourning and of rebirth. He wandered the demon worlds of the Eye, studying their horrors and learning the truth of chaos, not as gods to worship, but as forces to master. He saw champions who had pledged their souls to demons reduced to mindless beasts. He saw sorcerers twisted into abominations by their own ambitions. Each sight hardened his resolve. While the Warmaster's corpse decayed on the surface of Malium, Abaddon gathered relics of the Heresy, gene seed vaults, weapons, and knowledge. He found the scattered warbands of his legion and broke them or forged them anew under his rule. His voice, once quiet, became a whisper across the Eye. The son of Horus lives. The first captain rises again to the Imperium, this time became known as the Silent Decades, a century when the traitor legions vanished from the stars. The High Lords of Terror believed chaos had finally devoured itself. But among the demonic storms, the Black Legion was being reborn, tempered like a blade in the void, hammered by hatred and reforged in purpose. When Abaddon emerged from the Eye of Terror once more, he no longer bore the shame of his father's name. He bore a new symbol, the Eye of Horus, blackened and reborn in gold, a mark that would soon be seen again across the stars. The galaxy thinks us broken. Let them believe it. When next we come, it will not be as beggars or heretics, but as conquerors. Ezekiel Abaddon. The Eye of Terror, the crucible of damnation, the womb of rebirth, where the galaxy's sins take form. The Eye of Terror, a wound in reality itself, where the laws of physics and faith both unravel. To the Imperium, it is a cursed storm, a prison for traitors and monsters. But to the exiled legions, it is home, a kingdom of nightmares and opportunity, where demons whisper promises and reality bleeds with memory. For Abaddon, it was both a grave and a forge. Here, in this swirling madness, the first captain would confront what remained of his father's dream and reshape it into his own. As the Imperium turned its gaze inward, fortifying the scars of the Horus Heresy, the Eye of Terror boiled with unholy life. There, ancient warlords fought for demon worlds, forging twisted empires amid tides of madness. Worlds formed and shattered in seconds. Armies rose, died, and were reborn in fire and shadow. Amid this chaos, Ezekiel Abaddon began his pilgrimage. He would walk through nightmare and flame, not to beg for the gods' favor, but to claim dominion over them. Each step would test his strength, his will, his very soul. This chapter marks the transformation, not of a man, but of an idea. The idea that chaos could be united, not through devotion, but through fear and purpose. The idea that the galaxy's suffering had only just begun. Within the eye, I found no gods, only power, and I took it. Abaddon the Despoiler. Descent into the warp. The stars burned like dying embers as the fleet of the sons of Horus, what little remained of it, drifted toward the edge of the Eye of Terror. The warp storms raged there, a titanic maelstrom of madness that had swallowed worlds whole since the dawn of time. To enter was to forsake all reason, all safety, all ties to reality itself. But Abaddon did not hesitate. He stood upon the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, the once mighty flagship of Horus Lupercal, now scarred, haunted, and adrift. Its halls still echoed with the ghosts of the heresy. The bulkheads wept oil like blood. Fox channels screamed with whispers of the dead. The ship itself had become a relic of betrayal. Yet, for Abaddon, this was sacred ground. The Imperium fears the Eye, he spoke to his warriors. But we were born in its shadow. We are its children, and it will not devour us. With that command, the fleet plunged into the maelstrom. What followed defied mortal comprehension. The void turned inside out. The stars melted into rivers of color and madness. Demonic shapes clawed at the hulls of ships, whispering in voices that sounded like forgotten lovers. Men screamed as their memories were rewritten, some believing they were still on Terra, others convinced they were gods. But at the center of it all stood Abaddon, unmoved, unbroken. In the depths of the warp, he saw visions, Horus's fall replayed endlessly, each time with a different outcome. In one, Horus slew the Emperor. In another, he was redeemed. He saw himself crowned Warmaster, worshipped by demons, and he saw himself devoured by them, piece by piece. He understood then what the others never had. Chaos was not a pantheon. It was a hunger a storm that could never be appeased, only used. On a world of shifting flesh and brass, one of the countless demon worlds, he was confronted by a host of nightmares. Demons of the blood god demanded his skull. Warp entities of Tzeentch promised him eternity in exchange for his loyalty. The Prince of Excess offered him perfection, while the Plague Lord whispered peace through decay. Abaddon knelt before none. He raised the talon of Horus, his father's own weapon, and slaughtered the emissaries of the gods that sought to claim him. Their blood burned like sunlight on his armor, but he did not falter. When the storm finally broke, only silence remained. Abaddon stood upon a blackened plain beneath a sky of screaming light, his armor scorched, his spirit scarred, yet unbroken. "The gods are tools," he declared to the void, "and I am their master." At that moment, the Eye of Terror itself seemed to acknowledge him. Its storms parted, its fires dimmed. A dark wind whispered his name across the warp. Abaddon had not entered the Eye to lose himself. He had entered to become something greater, something that even the Chaos gods would come to fear. The Talon of Horus, the warp storms had quieted, if such a thing could ever be said of the Eye of Terror. In the stillness between madness and eternity, Abaddon stood upon the broken spires of a demon world, its landscape twisting with every heartbeat, its sky alive with screams. It was here, amidst the ruins of the past, that he would reclaim the weapon that once symbolized both glory and ruin, the Talon of Horus. It was not merely a weapon, it was a legacy, the power fist and combi bolter that had once ended the lives of Primarchs, shattered loyalist champions, and struck at the Emperor himself. When Horus fell, the Talon was lost, buried beneath the wreckage of the vengeful spirit, sealed in a tomb of memory and corruption. Abaddon descended into that tomb alone. The ship's interior had become a mausoleum of despair. The corridors pulsed with veins of living metal, and every surface bore the faces of the dead, sons of Horus, frozen in expressions of agony and betrayal. Their voices whispered from the walls, pleading for release, cursing their commander, mourning the Warmaster. Deeper still, Abaddon reached the Warmaster's chamber. The air was thick with decay and psychic echoes. Upon the floor, like an offering, lay the corpse of Horus Lupercal, or what remained of it. The body that once commanded the galaxy was now a husk, its flesh eaten by demons, its soul long scattered to the winds of chaos. And beside it, half buried in ash and bone, was the Talon. When Abaddon reached for it, the warp itself recoiled. Visions surged through his mind. The siege of terror, the Emperor's wrath, Horus's fall. 1,000 screams became one, and the gods themselves seemed to demand you would wear his weapon first, Captain. You would dare call yourself his heir. Abaddon's grip tightened. I am no heir. As his hand closed around the Talon, the chamber erupted in light and fire. Demons clawed their way from the corpse of Horus, screaming in hatred, desperate to protect what remained of their fallen champion. But Abaddon was no longer the servant who once knelt before the Warmaster. He was reborn. With a single motion, he tore through the demonic horde, each strike echoing like thunder. The Talon of Horus roared to life, its bolter spitting fire, its claws crackling with ancient power. The weapon recognized its new master, not through faith, but through will. When the last demon fell, the vengeful spirit fell silent once more. Abaddon stood over Horus's corpse, his armor scorched and bleeding warp light. He raised the talon high and spoke to the shadows. The age of the Warmaster is over. The age of the Despoiler begins. From that moment onward, the galaxy would never again forget the name Abaddon. The talon, once the symbol of Horus's fall, had found a new purpose as the instrument of his son's ascension. And somewhere at the depths of the warp, the gods laughed, not in mockery, but in anticipation. The covenant of the dark gods. When Abaddon emerged from the tomb of his father, the eye of terror itself trembled. He bore the talon of Horus, reborn in his grasp, its runes blazing with fresh power, drawn from the warp's heart. The demonic storms howled his name, echoing across the twisted realms of chaos. Words spread like fire. The first captain lives. The son of Horus walks again. Warbands turned their gaze toward him. Sorcerers who had once called themselves prophets sought his audience. Demon princes stirred in their shadowed dominions, curious or threatened. For in the eye of terror, strength commanded reverence, and Abaddon had become strength incarnate. Yet the dark gods watched in silence. They had seen mortals rise before, champions, warlords, prophets, and each, in time, had bowed. But this one was different. Abaddon had defied them and lived. He had taken their gifts, not in worship, but in conquest. Still, the gods are patient. They understand the art of temptation better than any mortal ever could. On the world of Uralan, where the skies wept fire and oceans churned with blood, they came to him, not in the form of avatars, but through visions and trials. Khorne tested him first, in the pits of endless slaughter, where the ground was a carpet of skulls. There, Abaddon faced champions of every legion, berserkers of the World Eaters, demonic butchers, even echoes of Horus's lieutenants. For 7 days, he fought without rest, until the rivers of blood ran dry. When he stood victorious, the blood god's laughter echoed in his mind, not in mockery, but in acknowledgement. Then came Tzeentch, twisting reality itself. The architect of fate offered Abaddon the secrets of time, the power to undo the heresy, to rewrite history so that Horus would triumph. But Abaddon saw through the deceit. The past is a tomb, he said, and I have no use for corpses. The illusion shattered, and the changer of ways fell silent. From the gardens of decay came the laughter of Nurgle, who sought to embrace him as a favored son. Abaddon endured a plague that rotted flesh from bone, that whispered peace through pain. And when he emerged, untouched and unbowed, the plague god simply smiled. Even rot can learn to respect steel. The Lord of Pestilence murmured. Last came Slaanesh, veiled in beauty and despair, offering him perfection, mastery of sensation, eternity of pleasure. She appeared as all things he had ever desired. Comrades lost, glories forgotten, even the Emperor himself kneeling before him. But Abaddon turned away. Perfection is death, he said, and cast her vision into the void. Thus, the four beheld him, the mortal who had faced each of them and bent to none. And so, a covenant was struck, not of loyalty, but of understanding. The gods would grant him power, not as a servant, but as an instrument. Through him, their will would burn the galaxy, not as fractured hungers, but as one united storm. In exchange, Abaddon would carry their war into the stars to tear down the Imperium and finish what Horus began. As the warp winds howled, the Despoiler stood upon the obsidian plains of Uralan, his armor wreathed in dark light. Around him, champions knelt, warriors of every traitor legion, mercenaries, sorcerers, and even demons. I do not kneel to gods, Abaddon proclaimed, but they will serve me, as will you all. Together, we will unmake the Emperor's dream and forge a new one in its ashes. From that night forward, the warp echoed with a single name, not whispered but feared. Abaddon the Despoiler, bearer of the covenant of the dark gods. The seeds of the Black Crusades had been sown. The gathering of traitors, the Eye of Terror was never still. A storm of fire and madness where even eternity burned. Yet, in that endless chaos, a new order began to take form. Word of Abaddon's return had spread like psychic wildfire through the demon worlds, carried on the whispers of sorcerers, the dreams of the damned, and the screams of dying warlords. The first captain of Horus had returned, and with him, the promise of unity or annihilation. Across the broken dominions of the traitor legions, the call went out. Abaddon's emissaries, black-armored warriors, bearing the Eye of Horus, now cast in gold, appeared on every demon world. Some came as diplomats, others as executioners. Their message was always the same. The son of Horus summons you. Stand with him, or be forgotten. The scattered legions, the world eaters, had become feral beasts, their brotherhood shattered into countless slaughter bands, each led by a different lord of blood. Most refused the call, but some, warriors who remembered discipline, who hungered not just for battle, but for victory, followed Abaddon's emissaries into the Eye's dark heart. The Emperor's children laughed at the message. To them, unity was a chain, and they were already gods unto themselves. Yet, even among them, a few remembered the glory of the Great Crusade before madness consumed it. Those few came, drawn not by loyalty, but by curiosity, by the scent of something greater. The Death Guard, bloated with rot and indifference, ignored the call at first. But when the Plague Lord himself whispered that the Despoiler carried his favor, small cohorts began to march, their bells tolling a dirge that shook the void, and the 1,000 suns, ever secretive, watched from afar. A handful of sorcerers, seeking to read Abaddon's fate in the warp, found themselves unable to. His destiny was clouded even to them. Some called that proof of the gods' will, and so they came, cloaked in fire and mystery. But the greatest test lay with his own kin, the remnants of the sons of Horus, the return to Mylium, the planet Malium, once a shrine to Horus's corpse, had become a pit of despair. Rival warbands of his former legion had fought for centuries over the scraps of their father's memory, desecrating what remained of their honor. When Abaddon returned, they did not greet him as a savior. They greeted him with guns. For 7 days and 7 nights, he waged war against his own brothers. Every false warmaster who had claimed Horus's name was dragged from his fortress and executed upon the ashes of their gene sire's tomb. When the last pretender fell, Abaddon addressed the survivors. His armor was black as the void, the talon of Horus glimmering with blood and warp fire. "The sons of Horus are dead," he declared. "Your father is dead. Your honor is dead. But from the carcass of this legion, I will forge something eternal." And so, before the burning tomb of Horus, the Black Legion was born. Their armor was painted the color of vengeance, their oaths remade in fire and hate. No longer would they kneel to gods or ghosts. No longer would they live as scavengers of a dead dream. They were now one force, bound by purpose, sharpened by ruin. The warbands unite. In time, others came, Warbands from every legion, mercenaries, demons, and fallen champions, each driven by fear, ambition, or the undeniable gravity of Abaddon's will. He offered them not faith, but victory, not redemption, but purpose. His words spread through the warp like prophecy. The gods are tools. Chaos is a weapon. I will wield both, and the galaxy will bleed. The warlords who defied him were crushed. Those who joined him found themselves part of something far greater than they had ever known. An army born from the ruins of the Heresy, tempered by hate and bound by the will of one man. When at last the banners were raised and the eye of Horus burned gold upon fields of black, a new age began. The Black Legion stood united for the first time. The Imperium had forgotten the name Horus, but soon it would learn to fear another. From the ashes of the great betrayal rises a new fire. We are the Black Legion, and we are the end of all things. Ezekiel Abaddon. The Black Legion rises, cleansing the weak. When a legion dies, what remains is either rot or iron. Abaddon would accept nothing less than iron. Word of his return had not only drawn allies, it exposed weakness. In the aftermath of the Heresy, many wore names and titles bought by bravado. Others hid cowardice beneath ritual and muttered prayers to demons. Abaddon walked among them like a blade through fog, and where he found soft metal, he bent it over the anvil or flung it into the fires. The purge began in silence. At dawn, on rents of worlds that still remembered the old banners, black-clad detachments seized council halls and skull thrones. Pretenders to command were dragged out, their facades stripped. Those who had hoarded Horus relics for their own apotheosis were shown the ruin of their ambition. Abaddon did not enact blind vengeance. He enacted law, loyalty by deed, discipline by blood. Battles were staged like trials. Champions who answered Abaddon's call were forced to prove themselves against one another in contests that measured not only strength, but cunning, endurance, and will. Those who failed were not merely killed. They were used as example, their names struck from muster rolls, their houses razed so that no child might cling to a lie of inherited glory. More terrible than the executions were the rituals of purgation. Gene banks corrupted by superstition were opened and cleansed. Ritualists who had crafted demon rites into their liturgy were publicly discredited and broken. Where sentiment lingered, songs to Horus, relics fetishized into idols, Abaddon demanded iron resolve. Bury the past, or it will bury you. From the ruins and the ash, a core hardened. Veterans who had once wandered as scavengers now took up ranks with new purpose. Where there had been shame and scavenging, there now grew method and cadence. The Black Legion did not rise from compassion or pity. It was forged by the uncompromising hand of a commander who would accept nothing but efficiency and fury. We will cull the weak until only the will of victory remains, Abaddon declared, and the eye answered with a calm that tasted like omen. The reforging of identity, a legion that survives on ghost memories cannot last. Abaddon knew identity must be remade from the bones of the old into something new and final. He burned banners and painted armor. The once green heraldry of Luna was blackened and reworked. The eye of Horus cast now in gold upon a field of void, where names once recalled a lost Primarch. New names were given that celebrated deeds. Companies were restructured, not by sentimental lineage, but by merit and use. Kill teams, spearheads, siege cadres, each created to execute a purpose, not to live as relics. Oaths were rewritten in smoke and iron. Recruits swore not to Horus, not to demons, but to the long war and to the man who had given it meaning. Those oaths were enforced by right and trial. Sorcerers, who would sully the command chain with prophecy, were placed under strict watch. Their craft was harnessed to strategy rather than spectacle. Officers were trained to be cold calculators of attrition and spectacle, to lead with an economy of lives that would maximize victory. Discipline became doctrine. The Black Legion adopted a code that turned chaos into instrument. Reward for success, merciless correction for failure, and an unbending meritocracy that swallowed self-importance. Abaddon appointed lieutenants whose loyalty was proven by fire. Men who had butchered pretenders, who had long ago given up nostalgia for pragmatic brutality. These officers formed the Izakarian, the inner core of command, whose word carried the weight of final judgment. The reforging was also symbolic. The talon of Horus was displayed not as idol, but as standard, a reminder of what had been lost and what must be taken. The Legion's ceremonies became pared down, functional, designed to harden rather than to comfort. Songs were replaced with march orders, relic veneration with tactical drills. From identity reborn, the Black Legion gained cohesion. Where once splintered warbands drifted, now columns moved with unified rhythm. Where once ambition devoured brother, now ambition served a single will. Abaddon had not resurrected Horus. He had eclipsed him. The suns were no more. In their place stood an army tempered for one thing: to unmake empires. The Eye's arsenal, the Eye of Terror, is not a place of rest. It is a forge without end. While others drowned in its madness, Abaddon learned to shape it. The reforged Legion required more than faith and fury. It needed weapons worthy of its new destiny. Deep within demon-warped shipyards and the hollow carcasses of shattered worlds, the Black Legion began to build. Tech Marines, long lost to corruption, were forced back into discipline. Their twisted genius directed toward function, not heresy. Every bolter was remade, every suit of armor cleansed of its chaotic excess, until it served the purpose of war, not worship. In the graveyard of fleets, known as Uralan's Rift, Abaddon commanded the recovery of vessels that had drifted since the Heresy. Warp-eaten hulls were dragged from the storms by chain sorcery, reforged under the black sun of pandemonium. The flagship Vengeful Spirit, long a drifting carcass, was returned to strength. Its decks rebuilt, its demon core rebound under new compacts. It would once more become the spear of the Warmaster's will. The forge worlds that still clung to life within the Eye were seized, their rulers executed or enslaved. Factories spat out fresh armor, dreadnoughts, and demon engines bound not to petty chaos lords, but to the Legion's collective might. From the depths of the warp came gifts, possessed blades, living munitions, demon-bound tanks that roared in agony as they moved. Abaddon took them all, but never worshipped them. They were tools, nothing more. "We will not bow to the gifts of gods," he said to his artificers. "We will use them." By Abaddon's order, an armada began to coalesce. Sleek cruisers of pre-heresy make beside monstrous vessels of living steel. Within the Eye, a storm of preparation swelled, hidden from imperial eyes. The sons of Horus had become something else. Engineers of destruction, architects of their own destiny. Each weapon forged was a promise. Each ship launched a declaration. When the eye finally quieted, its forges burned black, and the void sang with the birth cries of new war machines. The arsenal was ready, and so too was the Legion. The proclamation. It began as a whisper carried on the warp. It ended as a thunder that shook the eye of terror. In the great amphitheater of the Demon Forge, world Urumkal, beneath skies that rained molten glass, Abaddon gathered every warlord, sorcerer, and renegade who dared call themselves master. Each came cloaked in arrogance, lords of iron, princes of the warp, self-proclaimed prophets of chaos. They came expecting a parley. They left with their world changed forever. Abaddon stood upon a dais of black iron, the talon of Horus upon his fist. Behind him loomed banners of gold and midnight, stitched with the sigil that would soon eclipse the eye itself. The Black Legion's eye of ascendancy. The air itself bowed as he spoke. The age of mourning is over. The age of vengeance begins. Horus failed because he sought to please the gods. I will not fail, for I seek to rule them. From this moment, we are no longer the sons of Horus, nor slaves to any ruinous power. We are the Black Legion, and the long war begins anew. Silence followed, then tremors of awe, then defiance. A dozen lords challenged him, crying blasphemy, demanding he prove his claim. Abaddon answered, not with words, but with war. The amphitheater became a slaughterhouse. The air cracked with bolter fire and sorcery. The ground trembled beneath demon steel boots. When the killing was done, Abaddon stood alone among corpses, his armor drenched in blood and molten ichor. The surviving warlords knelt. Thus, the proclamation of the Black Legion was sealed in blood. From that moment, every surviving warband within the eye bent the knee or burned. Demon worlds repainted their skies in black and gold. Ships took to the void under a single command sigil. Even the gods, fickle, prideful, turned their gaze toward the new Warmaster with wary fascination. For the first time since the Siege of Terror, chaos was united, not by faith, but by fear and ambition. The Black Legion had risen, and the galaxy would soon remember the name Abaddon the Despoiler. The 13 Black Crusades, the First Crusade, the Awakening. The galaxy forgot the name Abaddon. I reminded them, for nearly a millennium, silence had veiled the eye of terror. Imperial scholars declared the traitor legions extinct, their power broken, their names fading to myth. The sons of Horus had vanished into nightmare and been forgotten by the age they once sought to rule. But in the warp, silence is only the drawing of breath before the scream. When the Black Legion finally emerged, it was as if the eye itself exhaled rage. 1,000 ships, black and gold, tore from the storm like shards of night. Warp lightning flared along their hulls, and the void boiled in their wake. The Imperium's picket fleets along the Cadian Gate barely had time to register the contacts before they were erased from the stars. The First Black Crusade had begun. Abaddon did not seek glory. He sought remembrance. Each strike was chosen not for conquest, but for message. The first worlds to fall were those that had once spoken proudly of their part in the Horus Heresy's suppression. Their monuments to the Emperor's victory were torn down and replaced with black spires carved in the image of the eye. Their governors were impaled upon their own banners. From the bridge of the vengeful spirit, Abaddon watched it all unfold in silence. The talon of Horus rested upon his fist, and the demon sword, Drachnien, still dormant, hung at his side like a coiled serpent. When the Imperium's astropaths finally pierced the warp storms to send word to Terra, their message was brief and broken by static, but clear enough to shake the High Lords to silence. He has returned. The Warmaster walks again. The Black Legion struck deep into the Cadian Gate, hammering the fortress worlds that stood sentinel over the Eye. For the first time since Horus' fall, the Imperium truly faced the old enemy, not in scattered cult uprisings, not in demon raids, but in organized, disciplined warfare. The Sons of Horus were reborn as something far worse, the embodiment of chaos united. The Cadians, proud and unyielding, met them in a storm of fire. Entire regiments perished, holding the line against a tide of black-armored transgressors who fought not for gods, but for vengeance. Abaddon's command was methodical. He tested the Imperium's strength, its resolve, its new heroes. He wanted to see how much of the corpse god's empire remained alive beneath the rot. For 8 years, the war raged across the gate, not for territory, but for proof. When the final Imperial counterattack forced the Black Legion to withdraw into the Eye, Abaddon did not call it defeat. He called it awakening. The galaxy once again knew his name, and fear spread faster than any warp storm. From the bridge of his flagship, he spoke to his warlords. The Imperium endures only because it has forgotten what it fears. We will remind them, one crusade at a time. And so the legend began, the first scar of what would become 13. The first crusade was not the end of silence. It was the beginning of the long war. He crusades of blood and fire, 2 to 5. Each war is a lesson, each failure a refinement. The Imperium had survived Abaddon's return, barely. But survival is not victory, and the Warmaster of Chaos understood that better than any foe he faced. The first crusade had not been intended to destroy the Imperium. It had been the opening cut, shallow but precise, to see where the arteries lay beneath the armor. Now, he would begin to strike at them. The following millennia became a storm of war without baton or mercy. The second through fifth Black Crusades unfolded across the galaxy like a spreading contagion. They were not random rampages. They were experiments in domination, logistics, and power. Each crusade revealed more about how the Imperium reacted, how it bled, and where it could break. The Second Crusade, the burning of Igethmor, the world of Igethmor Prime, a fortress shrine of the Ecclesiarchy, burned for 7 years. Abaddon's forces descended upon it, not for conquest, but for faith. He sought to unmake the spiritual heart of the Imperium's westward expansion. Temples were defiled, cardinals crucified, upside down upon cathedral spires that dripped molten glass from orbital fire. It was there that Abaddon first began to gather the cult Mechanicus Heretica, the twisted tech priests who would one day build his demon forges in Pandemonium. The destruction of Igethmor crippled the Ecclesiarchy's morale for centuries and marked Abaddon's transition from marauder to grand strategist. The Third Crusade, the scouring of Gethsemane, Abaddon turned his gaze to the Segmentum Obscurus, where ancient forge worlds produced the war machines that guarded the Cadian Gate. His fleets struck at Gethsemane, a world whose entire crust was a factory. The Adeptus Mechanicus deployed titans to repel him, god machines towering over the battlefield. But Abaddon countered with demon engines and warp-possessed artillery. When the smoke cleared, the entire forge world was cracked open like a skull. From its molten heart, Abaddon claimed the Forge of Souls, a warp-touched mechanism capable of binding demon essence into steel. With this, the Black Legion began mass production of war gear forged from both matter and madness. The Fourth Crusade, the Pact of Blood. The fourth was not waged against the Imperium, but within chaos itself. By then, rival legions, the Word-Bearers, the Alpha Legion, the Night Lords, had begun to resent the rise of the Black Legion. Abaddon crushed rebellion after rebellion, using war as both weapon and warning. It was during this era that he forged alliances with several demon princes of Gorn and Nurgle, binding them to oaths that mixed fear with admiration. The blood god's champions tested him and died beneath the talon of Horus. The demon world of Skalathrax fell under his dominion, and the scattered warbands of the once proud World Eaters began to march beneath his banner, united not by worship, but by the promise of endless battle. The Fifth Crusade, the Forge of Damnation. By the time of the Fifth Crusade, Abaddon's campaigns had become grand designs rather than raids. He struck at Goth's edge, the frontier of the Imperium's naval might. Entire battle fleets burned, and several systems were pulled into the warp by sorcerous detonations. This crusade's true purpose, however, was not destruction. It was acquisition. Deep within the warp storms of the campaign, Abaddon uncovered the Demon Forge of Uralan, a relic of the Dark Mechanicum lost since the Heresy. Within it lay the fragments of an ancient weapon, a sword said to have been wielded by Horus himself. The weapon whispered in Abaddon's dreams, promising power unlike any mortal or demon could comprehend. He did not yet claim it, but he would. The galaxy, bloodied and confused, began to notice a pattern. Every time Abaddon struck, he emerged stronger. Every defeat refined him. Every loss fed his next rise. By the end of the Fifth Crusade, the Imperium no longer dismissed him as another warlord from the Eye. He had become something far worse, the architect of an eternal war. The gods of chaos watched in uneasy silence. The galaxy burned, and Abaddon learned. The Sixth Crusade, the Ghost Wars. The living think the warp is madness. They do not yet know what it means to fight within it. The Sixth Black Crusade began not with a declaration, but with a disappearance. Entire sectors along the galactic north simply went dark. Astropathic choirs screamed and died. Warp routes turned to glass. The Imperium, used to the Eye's storms, mistook it for another fluctuation in reality's great wound. They were wrong. Abaddon had found a new frontier of war, not of planets or fleets, but of shadows. The Sixth Crusade was waged across both real space and the immaterial, a campaign so vast and strange that Imperial historians would later call it the Ghost Wars. The Eldar's foresight. Long before the Imperium realized the scale of what was coming, the craft world Eldar had already seen it in their runes. The seer councils of Ultway and Alitok divined a growing power that twisted the warp's currents into a singular sentient storm. They named it the Shadow of Horus. To them, Abaddon's rise was more than mortal ambition. It was a psychic beacon that risked tearing the veil apart. The Eldar fleets struck first, ambushing the outermost Black Legion warbands near Bellis Corona. But they were not facing the disorganized warlords of the past. The Black Legion anticipated them. Sorcerers of the Isakarian had already mapped the skein of fate through the warp itself. When the Eldar fleet dropped from the webway, they emerged into a trap of folded reality. For 3 days, the void screamed. The webway gates bled open like wounds, and demons poured into the stars. Eldar craft tore apart under invisible claws. For every ghost ship that escaped, 10 burned, their souls devoured into the eye. The Eldar called it the Night of Screaming Stars, the war in two worlds. What made the Sixth Crusade unique was its nature. It was the first war fought simultaneously in both realms, the material and the warp. Abaddon deployed not only fleets and armies, but entire soul legions, bound echoes of dead warriors tethered to the living through sorcery. His warlords fought shadow counterparts of themselves in battles that lasted centuries within the eye, while their real bodies continued to fight in the void. In the warp, planets bled memories. In real space, fleets bled fire. Abaddon's goal was to reshape the warp storms along the Cadian corridor, to create permanent tears he could use as invasion arteries for later crusades. Though the Imperium eventually rallied and forced him back, the scars remained. To this day, those rifts are known to the navigators as the Ghost Corridors, cursed routes where time falters and the dead whisper coordinates that no machine can read. The cost and the lesson, the Sixth Crusade, ended not in defeat but in withdrawal. Abaddon left behind ruined sectors, crippled Eldar fleets, and a map of new warp arteries that would serve him for millennia. The Imperium called it a victory. Cardia still stood, but the truth was far darker. The Despoiler had begun to reshape reality itself into his weapon. Even the Chaos Gods grew wary. For the first time, they realized that their champion was not a pawn of their desires, but a rival to their control. The gods crave worship. Abaddon told his lieutenants, "I crave results." The Ghost Wars taught him that no enemy, no matter how ancient or psychic, could see everything. Even prophecy bleeds when cut deeply enough. The 7th to 10th Crusades, the long betrayal. The Black Legion ascends beyond the Eye of Terror. The 7th through 10th Black Crusades were not fought merely against the Imperium. They were wars of dominion within the ranks of chaos itself. For by now, Abaddon had grown into more than a warlord. He had become the axis around which the destinies of traitor legions turned, and for many, that truth was unbearable. The word-bearers, ever fanatical, accused him of arrogance before the Dark Gods. The Night Lords, born of terror and rebellion, refused to kneel to any master. Even the Iron Warriors and Alpha Legion played their own shadowed games, each seeking to manipulate the Despoiler for their own ends. But Abaddon saw through them all. He no longer sought conquest alone. He sought unity through domination. The traitor legions had languished in the Eye of Terror for 10,000 years, gnawing on each other's bones while the Imperium endured. Abaddon would break this endless cycle. He would forge them into a weapon that could finally end the long war. Thus began the 7th Crusade, known among his warriors as the War of Chains. Abaddon led the Black Legion against rival warbands, slaughtering those who opposed him and enslaving the rest. The word-bearers, chaplains, who refused to bend, were impaled upon the hulls of their own warships. Night Lords who mocked him were hunted down, their terror tactics turned against them until even they screamed his name in fear. Those who survived swore new oaths beneath the vengeful spirit's black banners. They were bound by blood, by pain, and by the promise of eternal victory. It was during these years that Abaddon founded the Ezekarian, his inner circle of champions, beings of immense power, drawn from across the eye. Among them stood the demon Prince Igethmor, the deceiver, the monstrous sorcerer Iskandar Kayon, the corrupted space marine Telemachon Lyras, and the eternal schemer Leorvine Ukris. Together, They became the Black Heart of the Legion, each a reflection of Abaddon's vision. Loyalty forged through shared damnation. The 8th and 9th Crusades followed, not as assaults upon the Imperium, but as campaigns of purification within the warp. Abaddon hunted down rogue chaos warlords, destroyed demon worlds that threatened his growing dominion, and even struck against the Black Legion's own kin when their faith faltered. His fleets scoured the Eye of Terror, subjugating thousands of cults and fortresses until a dark empire emerged, one disciplined by iron, not madness. By the 10th Crusade, Abaddon's name had become legend even among demons. When he spoke, the warp itself trembled. When he commanded, entire warbands threw down their weapons to join him, desperate to share in his inevitable conquest. And though his wars during these centuries left the material galaxy untouched, their echoes were profound. The Imperium, believing the long war dormant, grew complacent. But within the Eye, Abaddon's blade was being honed, sharper, darker, unbreakable. The long betrayal had ended not in Abaddon's defeat, but in his ascension. For while others served the gods, Abaddon served only the war eternal, and through that service, he became something more than mortal, more than demon. He became the Despoiler, the Warmaster reborn. The Eye of Terror no longer confined him. It was his throne, and from its depths, the galaxy would soon burn anew. The 11th and 12th Crusades, the culling, the wars of silence, and the slaughter of saints. By the time the 11th Black Crusade began, Abaddon no longer needed to prove his strength. His enemies, both Imperial and traitor, already whispered his name with dread. But this crusade would not be one of glorious battles or open war. It was a war of erasure, a precise and calculated campaign meant to cripple the Imperium's spirit before striking its heart. Across the Segmentum Obscurus, worlds that had long been sanctuaries of faith began to fall silent. Astropathic choirs screamed and died as warp interference choked their voices. Pilgrimage routes vanished beneath storms of madness. Shrines once blessed by the ecclesiarchy were found desecrated, their saints' bones scattered, their relics shattered to dust. Abaddon's purpose was not conquest, it was surgical annihilation. He sought out the Imperium's symbols of hope, those rare souls whose faith still inspired billions. Living saints, prophets, and heroes of the Adepta Sororitas became his targets. Each was hunted down, not for their strategic value, but for the despair their deaths would spread. At Sanctus Lysara, the Sainte Euphrosyne, the unyielding, led her followers against demonic incursions. Abaddon sent the bringers of despair, his elite terminators, to silence her. When she fell, the light of her faith extinguished not just her armies, but entire worlds that drew strength from her name. The Imperium felt the wound. It was as if a star had gone out. In the 12th Crusade, the pattern repeated. Abaddon turned the Black Legion into an invisible scythe, cutting through the Imperium's lines of faith and morale. Temples burned, holy worlds bled, and the ecclesiarchy's preachers fell into madness as visions of chaos flooded their dreams. The gods of the warp feasted upon the despair that followed. Yet, Abaddon took no joy in their indulgence. He was patient, cold. He fought not for their amusement, but for his destiny. Where others sought favor, he sought mastery. In hidden conclaves, the High Lords of Terror argued whether the Warmaster still lived, or if the Despoiler was merely a title adopted by a new monster. but the truth was more terrifying. Abaddon had become an idea, a curse that moved through the galaxy like shadow fire. Every victory of the Imperium was met with unseen loss. Every saint that rose was silenced before their legend could grow. By the end of the 12th Crusade, no Imperial commander dared speak of hope. And as the last holy world of Kyros Tenebris burned, Abaddon stood upon the corpse of a dying saint and whispered into the void, "Faith is the armor of fools. When it cracks, all that remains is fear." The galaxy trembled, not from invasion, but from anticipation, for all knew, deep within the warp and the Imperium alike, that these were but the final breaths before the storm. The 13th Black Crusade was coming. And when it came, there would be no mercy, only the end. The 13th Crusade, the fall of Cardia, the breaking of the gate, and the birth of the Great Rift. 10,000 years of war had led to this moment. Every crusade, every betrayal, every whispered promise from the dark gods had been but the drawing of a blade. And now, at last, Abaddon struck. The Cadian Gate, the last true bulwark between the Eye of Terror and the Imperium of Man, stood as a monument to defiance. For millennia, the fortress world of Cadia had endured every assault the Despoiler hurled against it. Its soldiers were legends, born and bred for war, their lives spent holding back the storm. But even legends have limits. When the 13th Black Crusade began, it was unlike any before. Not a raid, not a test. It was extermination. Abaddon unleashed a fleet so vast it blotted out the stars. The combined wrath of 10,000 years of hatred. The Black Legion led the charge, their warships flanked by the Iron Warriors' siege fleets, the Death Guard's pestilent hulks, and even demon worlds dragged screaming from the warp to serve as living weapons. The Imperium answered with everything it had. The Cadian Eighth, the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Grey Knights, and even elements of the Sisters of Battle stood together upon that doomed world. At their heart burned the living saint, Celestine, her wings radiant even amidst the void black night. She was the Imperium's last light, and Abaddon had come to extinguish it. For days Cardia's skies burned. The Blackstone fortresses, ancient relics of impossible design, drifted into position above the planet. Once weapons of the Emperor's design, now they answered to Abaddon's will. With the Word-Bearers' dark rituals and the Iron Warriors' precision, they turned their immense power upon the planet itself. The first fortress fired. The crust of Cadia split. Mountains became oceans of molten rock. Still, the defenders fought on. The second fortress fired. The planetary shields shattered. The void screamed. And still, Saint Celestine stood, her blade blazing with the Emperor's light. For every daemon that rose, she struck it down. For every space marine who fell, she carried their souls with prayer. Even Abaddon himself descended upon the battlefield, the Warmaster, clad in the armor of Mournival, his sword, Drachnian, burning with the essence of pure chaos. Their duel was apocalyptic, faith against damnation, light against the abyss. Celestine's wings burned brighter than ever before, and then were torn apart. Abaddon's blade cleaved through her light, and though she would rise again, in that moment, hope died. As the final Blackstone fortress aligned, the Imperium's last fleet attempted one desperate gambit to destroy the station before it fired, but Abaddon's will was absolute. The fortress turned, not upon the defenders, but upon Cadia itself. The planet's core ruptured. the world cracked open, consumed by its own gravity. And from that cataclysmic explosion, the warp bled into reality. The Cadian Gate was gone. The Eye of Terror burst outward, no longer confined, and the galaxy screamed as the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, was born. Half the Imperium was plunged into eternal night. The Astronomican's light faltered, and entire sectors were swallowed by madness. The Imperium Nihilus was born, a realm of shadow where even the Emperor's radiance could not reach. As for Abaddon, he stood upon the broken husk of his flagship, gazing into the expanding wound he had created. The warp storms crowned him with fire. His armor glowed with the blessing of the Four. For the first time, the gods of chaos spoke as one. You are ours. The Warmaster of Chaos, the End of Empires, and Abaddon, the Despoiler, simply raised his sword, not in worship, but in defiance. I am no servant, he said. I am the storm. Thus ended the 13th Black Crusade, and thus began the Age of Ending. Where gods walked, empires fell, and the line between damnation and salvation blurred forever. The Despoiler's Creed, the meaning of chaos, the creed of the Despoiler. To the legions of chaos, the warp is both God and grave. For 10,000 years, the traitor legions had worshipped the dark gods as masters. Beings of infinite power and infinite hunger, they offered blood to Khorne, secrets to Tzeentch, decay to Nurgle, and excess to Slaanesh. And in return, they were given gifts, power, immortality, madness. But Abaddon the Despoiler saw what others could not, that chaos is not divinity, but freedom unchained. To worship the gods was to kneel before another tyrant, and Abaddon had bent the knee once before to the Warmaster Horus. He would never do so again. In the cold darkness of the Eye of Terror, Abaddon forged his creed. He declared that chaos is a weapon, not a master, that the gods were not beings to be served, but storms to be ridden, dangerous, capricious, and vast. The weak drowned in their madness. The strong learned to steer through it. The warp rewards the powerful, not the faithful, he said. Let fools pray. We will take what we desire. The gods of chaos, amused and enraged in equal measure, tested him endlessly. They sent demons to tempt him, champions to challenge him, visions to seduce him into worship. Yet, Abaddon never yielded. When demons whispered promises of eternal glory, he answered with silence, or with his blade, Drachnian, a weapon forged from the essence of the warp itself. Those who followed him began to adopt his creed. The Black Legion became unlike any other. They still drew strength from chaos, but they did not prostrate themselves before it. Their rituals were not prayers, but affirmations of will, acts of domination over the warp, not submission to it. Abaddon taught his warriors that faith was a chain, that the Emperor's Imperium had enslaved mankind with one lie, and the Chaos Gods sought to enslave it with another. Only those who rejected both could be truly free. He stood between gods and mortals, not as a servant, but as a conqueror. He would use the warp as Horus once used legions, as a tool of war, an extension of his wrath. And in this, Abaddon achieved something no other champion of chaos had done. He commanded the favor of all four gods, yet belonged to none. The demons whispered his name with caution. The gods themselves watched him with fascination and fear, for they knew, deep within the Immaterium's ever-shifting tides, that Abaddon's creed was not merely rebellion. It was the heresy of chaos itself. He did not seek to serve the gods. he sought to replace them. The Black Legion's code, discipline in damnation. When Horus fell, the traitor legions dissolved into madness. The once proud warriors of the Great Crusade became warlords of ash and ruin. Each legion a splintered reflection of its former glory. The Eye of Terror became their cage, and Chaos their keeper. But Abaddon refused that fate. He had seen what unrestrained devotion to the gods had done to his brothers, turned visionaries into beasts, generals into fanatics. So, when he rose to power, he did not promise salvation. He promised order. From the shattered remains of the sons of Horus, he forged a new creed, a code of the Black Legion. It was not written in scripture, nor sung in ritual. It was carved into the hearts of every warrior who swore allegiance to the Warmaster of Chaos. The first law: there are no gods, only power. Every warrior must serve strength alone. The gods may bless, but they may also betray. Power is the only constant. Power seized, not gifted. Those who seek favor instead of mastery are no better than slaves. Abaddon himself enforced this rule brutally. When a Chaos Lord dared to pray aloud before battle, Abaddon executed him, not for blasphemy, but for weakness. "You beg the warp for victory," he said coldly. "I take it." The second law: all are equal in oath, unequal in worth. The Black Legion accepts all who swear the oath of the Despoiler. Any legion, any world, any race. But equality ends at the oath. From that moment on, worth is determined only by will, loyalty, and strength. World Eaters fight beside Thousand Suns, word-bearers beside Iron Warriors, each bound by the same command. They may hate each other, but they obey. In Abaddon's Legion, rivalry is fuel, insubordination is death. The third law: the long war above all. The Imperium must burn, not for vengeance, but for purpose. Each crusade, every atrocity, every act of war serves the same eternal design: to break the false emperor and unmake his rotting empire. There is no rest, no peace, no end. The Long War is not a campaign, it is existence itself. The fourth law: the Legion is eternal. No warrior of the Black Legion fights for himself. Each bears the will of the Warmaster, the voice of Chaos's defiance. When one falls, another rises. Their flesh may die, but the Legion endures, a shadow that stretches across eternity. Among them, death is not failure. Failure is forgetting the oath. Under these laws, Abaddon turned ruin into order. Where the other legions succumbed to madness, the Black Legion became an empire of precision and faithless devotion, united not by belief, but by ambition. They did not worship the warp, they commanded it. They did not serve chaos. They embodied it, disciplined, calculating, and eternal. And above all, they followed one truth, whispered in the void before every battle. There is no peace. There is no mercy. There is only the long war, and in its shadow, we are immortal. The Wars of the Maelstrom, that chaotic twin to the Eye of Terror, had long seethed with warp storms and shattered realities, a maelstrom of damned worlds and forgotten empires. While the Eye remained Abaddon's throne of terror, the maelstrom became the crucible of endless war, a frontier where the Imperium and Chaos clashed in perpetual fury. When Abaddon's fleets emerged from the Eye, their reach extended far beyond. The maelstrom became both gateway and graveyard for countless warbands. For there, the influence of the ruinous powers intertwined with the ambitions of mortal men. In the shadow of the warp storms, Black Legion task forces hunted remnants, of the Red Corsairs, Word-bearers, and Night Lords who sought dominion over the same cursed void. Each battle was not for conquest, but for survival, and for Abaddon's vision of unity through terror. The most infamous of these conflicts was the Siege of Gethsemane Reach, where the Black Legion fought against Huron Blackheart's Red Corsairs. The airless battlefields of shattered moons were lit by plasma fire and sorcery, as Warlord turned upon Warlord. Abaddon did not come to destroy Huron, but to remind him, and every renegade who hid beneath the Maelstrom storms, that there was only one Warmaster of Chaos. In the end, the Black Legion's shadow fell upon the Maelstrom like a storm within a storm. Abaddon's message was carried by blood and flame. The Maelstrom was no sanctuary, no independent empire, only a proving ground for those who would kneel or die. Many did kneel, others were annihilated, and for every warlord that perished, another world burned in Abaddon's name. The Maelstrom Wars forged the Black Legion into something far greater than a remnant of the sons of Horus. They became a symbol of chaos ascendant, disciplined, patient, and merciless. From the ashes of those conflicts arose a terrifying truth, whispered by demons and mortals alike. Where the eye gazes, the Maelstrom follows. Abaddon's reach was no longer confined to one wound in reality. Chaos itself was beginning to move in rhythm with his will. A dark harmony that heralded the wars yet to come. The eternal plan. For centuries, the Imperium had called Abaddon a warlord, a despot of ruin, a slave to vengeance. Yet few understood that vengeance was only the surface of something deeper, a philosophy that had crystallized through millennia of war. Within the eye of terror, in the silent bastions of his flagship vengeful spirit, Abaddon contemplated not merely conquest, but rebirth. The Warmaster's vision was never to see the galaxy drown in unending fire for its own sake. To him, the Imperium was already dead, a corpse animated by fear, worship, and ignorance. Humanity had shackled itself to the illusion of the Emperor's divinity, a stagnant idol built on lies. Abaddon believed that only through destruction could mankind rediscover truth. There is no salvation in stasis, he once spoke before his lieutenants. Only through the crucible of chaos shall humanity ascend, free, unbound, divine. This was the eternal plan, to remake mankind in the image of chaos, not as thralls, but as masters of their own will. Each Black Crusade, each shattered world, each slain saint was a step in the purification of humanity's spirit, a slow burning away of weakness through fire and madness. To Abaddon, the long war was not endless because it failed, but because it must endure. It was a process of transformation. Every battle, whether lost or won, shaped the galaxy toward inevitable truth. The Imperium's survival was necessary, for without resistance, the flame of evolution would die. Even the Dark Gods, in their chaotic rivalry, began to see the Warmaster's design as something beyond mere devotion. Abaddon did not bow to them as a servant. He bargained, commanded, used them, shaping their gifts into tools of his will. His faith was not worship, but conviction. Chaos was not for gods, but the essence of change itself. And through it, humanity could finally break its chains. In secret conclaves, deep within the eye, Abaddon spoke of a time when the veil between the materium and immaterium would no longer matter, when mankind would live as one with the warp, no longer fearing the darkness, but becoming it. This was not nihilism. It was creation through annihilation. He saw the Long War not as revenge for Horus, but as the evolutionary furnace of humanity. The Imperium, the Ecclesiarchy, even the Chaos warbands who still clung to petty gods, all were tools within his grand design. Thus was the paradox of Abaddon the Despoiler, destroyer of worlds, yet architect of renewal. In his mind, every death was a seed, every crusade a step toward transcendence. The galaxy would burn, yes, but from the ashes, a truer humanity would rise. Let the weak perish, he whispered to the stars, for only through death shall we learn to live. The eternal plan was not madness, it was destiny. Cold, methodical, and terrifying in its purity. The age of the Dark Imperium, the galaxy divided and the war eternal. The great rift opens. It began not with a roar, but with a tearing, a soundless scream that rippled across the galaxy like the death cry of reality itself. The warp, that howling sea of madness which had ever lurked beyond the veil of existence, finally burst through its cage. Stars flickered and died. Worlds trembled as gravity twisted upon itself. The Astronomicon, that sacred beacon which had guided humanity for 10,000 years, flickered, stuttered, and was swallowed whole. Real space and the immaterium collided in cataclysmic fusion. Planets were ripped from their orbits, entire sectors consumed by tides of unreality. The warp storm that emerged, vast and eternal, would come to be known as the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift. It split the galaxy in two, a bleeding wound stretching from one edge of the Imperium to the other. Half the Imperium vanished into shadow, its worlds cut off from terror, from light, from hope. Communication ceased, faith faltered, and nightmares became real. In the darkness, demons danced freely upon mortal soil, and reality bent under their laughter. Where once imperial governors had ruled, now gibbering cults offered sacrifices to gods they no longer feared to name. To the Imperium, it was the end of the world. To Abaddon, the Despoiler, it was vindication. For 10,000 years, he had waged his long war, striking again and again at the Imperium's heart, and now, finally, the wound he had opened refused to close. Each Black Crusade had not been a failure, as his enemies claimed, but a calculated incision into the fabric of reality. Each victory, each sacrifice, each ritual of blood had been a blow against the very walls that separated the warp from the material plane. Now, those walls had fallen. The 13th Black Crusade had succeeded beyond even Abaddon's darkest dreams. Cardia, the unbreakable fortress world, was gone, reduced to ruin. The Eye of Terror had expanded, merging with the warp storms unleashed by his demon-forged weapons. In that instant, Abaddon stood upon the bridge of the vengeful spirit, gazing into the infinite rift that now split the stars. And he smiled. For the first time since Horus fell, the galaxy reflected his vision, broken, aflame, and free of false light. His fleets, empowered by the warp's fury, swept across the void unchallenged. Entire systems burned in his name. Demon princes, once rivals, now knelt in acknowledgement of his mastery. The dark gods themselves whispered with rare unity, for Abaddon's triumph had proven even their chaotic will could be harnessed. No longer was he the shadow of Horus, nor the desperate son of a fallen legion. He was the Warmaster of Chaos unrivaled, his dominion stretching from the eye to the newly born scar of reality. The Imperium Nihilus, the Dark Imperium, was his crucible, and within it, Abaddon saw the next stage of his eternal plan. The galaxy had been divided, one half still clinging to the dying light of the Emperor, the other consumed by the darkness of chaos. Yet for Abaddon, this was not an ending. It was the true beginning of what he had always sought. A galaxy unbound by the laws of man or God. The Great Rift was not the death of the Imperium. It was the birth of Abaddon's dominion. A universe remade in shadow. The return of Guilliman. From the abyss of despair, light flickered once more. It was faint at first, a rumor, a prayer, whispered among the scattered worlds of the Imperium Nihilus. Then came the impossible. Roboter Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, the avenging son of the Emperor, had returned. His resurrection was not divine, though the Ecclesiarchy would claim it so. It was the culmination of 10 millennia of faith, desperation, and heresy. With the aid of the Archmagos Belisarius Call and the mysterious Aeldari, Guilliman was pulled from the stillness of death and thrust into a galaxy unrecognizable from the one he had once ruled. When his eyes opened, he beheld not the noble Imperium he had built, but a rotting empire of blind worship and tyranny. An empire that revered his father not as emperor, but as God. The light of reason and progress he had once championed was extinguished, replaced by fanaticism and decay. The Imperium was a corpse, and its heart, terror, was a tomb. Yet Guilliman did not falter. Within days of his awakening, the Primarch reasserted command. Fleets rallied, legions of Primaris Marines, the secret fruits of Gaul's 10,000-year labor, marched under his banner. From the ashes, the Indomitus Crusade began, a campaign to restore the Emperor's dominion and bring light to the shadowed half of the galaxy. And in the eye of terror, Abaddon watched. He had shattered the galaxy, he had slain gods and toppled empires, and yet, the Imperium still drew breath. Worse still, its new champion bore the face of a god he could never kill, the face of the Emperor's bloodline. The rage that consumed the Despoiler was volcanic. To him, Guilliman's return was not salvation, but mockery. 10,000 years of blood and war, and the corpse god's empire still defied him, reborn beneath the banner of the one son who had never fallen. Abaddon's wrath became legend. He unleashed new waves of terror upon the stars. Black Legion fleets hunted the Indomitus Crusade wherever it went, striking from the shadows like wolves at the edge of reality. Entire systems burned, their skies lit by the clash of faith and fury. But beneath his fury lay something far more dangerous: respect. Abaddon knew that Guilliman was no mere puppet of the Ecclesiarchy. He was intellect and purpose, a mirror of what Abaddon himself once was, the embodiment of discipline and destiny. Two legacies now faced one another across a dying galaxy: order against chaos, faith against will. The son who preserved his father's dream against the son who sought to destroy it. Guilliman fought to restore meaning to humanity's hollow empire. Abaddon sought to tear that meaning apart, believing only destruction could lead to truth. Their war was more than armies and planets. It was ideology made manifest, the final battle for what humanity was meant to become. As the rift bled across the stars, the Despoiler and the Avenging Sun became the twin poles of existence itself. And though Guilliman's crusade rekindled hope, Abaddon's shadow grew ever deeper, waiting for the day when faith would again falter and the galaxy would remember who truly ruled the darkness. The Shadow Campaigns. The galaxy was fractured, its wounds still bleeding from the Great Rift. The Imperium struggled to hold itself together, even under Gilliman's crusade of reclamation. But while the Avenging Sun fought in the light, Abaddon waged war in the shadows, for the Despoiler understood a truth that Gilliman could never accept. Brute force alone would not win the long war. The Imperium was too vast, its faith too deeply ingrained. To destroy it utterly, one had to corrupt it from within, to rot its foundations until it collapsed under the weight of its own lies. Thus began what the Imperium would later call the Shadow Campaigns. From the depths of the Eye of Terror, the Black Legion dispersed in secret, no longer vast fleets announcing their arrival with thunder and flame. These were silent incursions, unseen and surgical. Warbands infiltrated warp-torn sectors of the Imperium Nihilus, masquerading as Imperial fleets, missionaries, or even angels of salvation. Entire systems fell without a single orbital bombardment. On Narcissus, a governor was gifted visions of the Emperor's wrath, illusions woven by Tzeentchian sorcery. And in his madness, he executed half his populace to appease the throne. On Delphra, a Mechanicus Forge world declared itself the new Holy Mars, claiming communion with the Omnissiah. Within months, its priests were offering prayers to a machine demon in Abaddon's name. And on Voltrus Prime, the people sang hymns of devotion even as the skies bled and demons walked their streets. They never realized their prayers were no longer answered by the Emperor, but by the Warmaster of Chaos. These were not battles measured in body counts or banners. They were psychic sieges, wars for belief, fought in the hearts of men. Each campaign was guided by Abaddon's lieutenants, champions forged from every legion that had once followed Horus. Khan's disciples spread slaughter beneath the guise of imperial retribution. The word-bearers, under Erebus's remnants, seeded new cults across the warp-storm worlds. The Alpha Legion, ever inscrutable, whispered secrets into the ears of Quilliman's commanders, turning brother against brother in the void. All of it was orchestrated from afar, the Warmaster's hand invisible, yet omnipresent. He no longer needed to lead every crusade personally. His ideology had become a virus, infecting both the servants of chaos and the Imperium itself. Even Gilliman's own crusade was not immune. In the outer fringes of the rift, rumors spread that the Primarch's resurrection had been tainted, that he was a tool of Xenos sorcery, or worse, a puppet of the warp. Those whispers grew, multiplied, and festered in the minds of the faithful. It was the same tactic Horus had once suffered, now perfected by Abaddon. The Imperium bled from unseen cuts. Its victories turned hollow. Its armies fought harder, prayed louder, but their unity was crumbling, exactly as the Despoiler intended. Let them fight their wars in daylight, Abaddon once said to his inner circle. We will own the night, and when their sons die, they will find that the darkness already belongs to us. Thus, the Black Legion evolved beyond crusades and sieges. They became the Shadow itself, silent, patient, and eternal. While Gilliman's light blazed briefly in defiance, Abaddon's darkness grew deeper, colder, infinite, and the galaxy, ever fragile, ever trembling, realized too late that the true war was no longer being fought with bolters and blades, but with truth and faith, both of which Abaddon had learned to corrupt perfectly. The legacy of 10,000 years, 10,000 years, 10,000 years of blood, fire and shadow. And still the Warmaster endures. Empires have risen and fallen in that span. Saints born and martyred, primarchs slain and resurrected. The galaxy itself has changed its shape, yet Abaddon the Despoiler remains, unchanged in purpose, undiminished in power. To the Imperium, he is a curse that cannot die, a specter that haunts every century of mankind's history. To the servants of chaos, he is the closest thing the gods have to a mortal reflection. Fury given form, will made flesh. But what has he truly achieved? The Imperium stands, yes, fractured, bleeding, divided. Yet its dream of unity, of order, has been shattered beyond repair. Even Guilliman's return cannot mend what Abaddon has undone. Faith has turned to fanaticism. Loyalty has curdled into paranoia. Every citizen, every priest, every soldier now lives under the shadow of the Long War. Abaddon has proven that the Emperor's dominion is not eternal, that mankind's truth is a fragile delusion, one strike away from dissolution. He has turned the galaxy into a crucible where only the strongest wills survive. That is his triumph. Not conquest, but corruption. Not annihilation, but revelation. For every world that falls to chaos, another begins to question the nature of faith. For every saint that dies, a heretic is born, whispering Abaddon's name. Even among the Emperor's most faithful, the seeds of doubt bloom. And that is victory enough for the Warmaster. Yet, such power bears a cost. 10 millennia of warfare have eroded what remains of his humanity. Once, he was Ezekiel Abaddon, first captain of the Lunar Wolves, loyal son of Horus, the perfect warrior. Now he is something else entirely, not mortal, not demon, suspended in the liminal void between man and God. He cannot die, he cannot rest, he cannot stop. The dark gods have offered him immortality, but it is not a gift, it is a sentence. Every victory demands another war, every crusade another sacrifice. His empire is made of ashes, his throne built from corpses. The galaxy he has shaped bears his reflection, beautiful, terrible, and endlessly suffering. In the quiet between wars, when the warp storms calm and the blood on his armor begins to dry, he sometimes walks the empty halls of the vengeful spirit, the same ship where Horus once stood, dreaming of a better future. In those moments, the memories return, the laughter of the Lunar Wolves, the pride of the Great Crusade, the day he first called the Emperor father. And then he remembers how it all ended. He looks upon the stars, the same stars his legion once sought to unite, and whispers words that no demon can hear. I am not Horus. I am worse. Not a servant, not a usurper, not even a god, but something far more enduring, the consequence of the Imperium's sins, the reflection of its hypocrisy, the shadow cast by its light. 10,000 years of war, and still the Warmaster fights, not for victory, but for purpose. For in the endless darkness of the 41st millennium, purpose itself has become the rarest and most dangerous weapon of all. And so, Abaddon endures. The galaxy burns, the gods laugh, and time itself bends before his will. His legacy is not measured in worlds conquered, but in the simple, undeniable truth that the long war will never end. The eternal war. The stars burn quietly now, their light dimmed by the scars of 10,000 years. Across the void, the echoes of Abaddon's crusades still whisper, a hymn of ruin that refuses to fade. Worlds have turned to dust, empires to memory, yet the long war continues, unbroken, Eternal, there are no victors in this galaxy, only survivors, haunted by the choices that shaped eternity. Abaddon stands as both destroyer and prophet, the shadow that mirrors mankind's sins. His war is no longer against the Imperium alone, but against the very idea of peace itself. For in his heart, he knows what few dare admit, that war is the only constant, the only truth that endures when faith and reason fail. 10,000 years have passed, and still the Despoiler marches. From the Eye of Terror to the edge of the Great Rift, his banner of black and gold rises again, carried by those who understand that to live in this universe is to fight without end. So the cycle turns once more, light against dark, faith against will, brother against brother, as it always has and always will. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. If you've walked this long road through darkness and lore, join us for the next chronicle of the 41st millennium. Subscribe and return again, for the war never ends.